Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
All right, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us this week. One of the greatest ways that we can empower citizens in the United States, and this is an incredible country that we live in, we have to remember, is in K through 12 education. And there's so much work to be done in that area. You know, I've talked about this before, but the government shouldn't be telling us what to do. Government shouldn't tell us that this is our choice or limit our choices in any way. That's what we're talking about when we talk about breaking barriers so that people can realize their full potential. But what happens when it's not a government barrier that's standing in the way of a child's education, but a union that decides to strike? That's what happened last week to the students of the second largest school district in the United States, the Los Angeles School District. Roughly 500,000 students stayed home because the teachers wouldn't cross the picket line of the service workers who were on strike. And this whole situation, I mean, it exemplifies how our current system is built around a system, and it's not built for the needs of the students. So how many of those students would not have been affected by the 3-day strike at all if they had something called an educational savings account? This would have allowed their parents and these children to decide which educational environment was best for them. And that could have been outside of the Los Angeles public school system if that's what they chose. More and more states are starting to pass educational savings accounts. And on this episode, I'm talking with Jason Huffman, the state director for Americans for Prosperity in West Virginia. And he's going to tell us about the amazing job that they did with the passage of some legislation that they called the Hope Scholarship. Jason, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Yeah. So first of all, you're born and raised in West Virginia, right? How many generations?
6 or 7, depending on how you count granddaddies.
Yeah. Okay. And then in true West Virginia fashion, there's a few coal miners in your family. Is that right?
The vast majority.
The vast majority. How'd you get out of that business?
Well, one day the old man looked at me and said, "Hey, I don't want you to do that." So I said, "Well, what else am I going to do?" He's like, "I don't care, but if I catch you in a coal mine, you'll stay there."
So wait, you went from the kind of dirty business of coal mining to the dirtier business of politics?
That's
or
correct. What? It confuses even him to this day. He's like, "That's not really what I meant, but okay."
I wanted you to get into something more reputable. I understand. Listen, and I understand your mom. So tell me, pizza rolls?
Pepperoni
rolls. Pepperoni roll. Okay, so tell me what's a pepperoni roll.
Okay, so
I'm going to have to come to West Virginia to have one.
The most quintessential West Virginia delicacy, all right, is a pepperoni roll.
And now, I screwed it up and I called it a pizza roll. Pepperoni.
We have those too, but they're different, right? Okay. So like a pepperoni roll,
yeah,
all right, is something that folks, particularly in North Central West Virginia, Irish American immigrants would come and they worked in the mines. It was a really easy thing to wrap up in bread and put pepperoni in there, and then you carried that into the mines with you. So that is like a West Virginia staple. You got to have one. My mom makes the best.
Okay.
In the entire state. I'll fight somebody over that.
Okay. No, listen, you won't have to fight me. I just got to come to West Virginia and try one of your mom's pepperoni rolls. So I promise I'm going to do that. Okay?
An open invite.
Open invite. Sounds good. And West Virginia is a beautiful state. For those who have not been to West Virginia, they should come visit West Virginia. It is gorgeous.
It is. Yeah, we have I think I won't leave there. It's one of the most beautiful places in the entire world. And I've been several places in the world, been fortunate enough to do that. But West Virginia is always home. It's
kind of a hidden gem to a lot of people. I mean, it's not like Florida. Everybody just goes to vacation in West Virginia, but they should. It's a nice place.
Well, we're quickly being, I think, discovered by a lot more folks because of the pro-growth, pro-freedom policies that we've adopted. A lot of folks that have left the state. I always joke and say, it used to be that the largest population center of West Virginia was actually North Carolina because so many folks had left to find opportunity. But now we're bringing those folks back home. No more, winters and Christmas is spent away from family. Folks are coming back together, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, that is a great thing. And, you talked about the pro-growth policies that West Virginia is implementing, and you really are, I think, over the last, I don't know, what's it been, 10 years or 15 years, really a movement towards pro-growth policies, pro-freedom policies, right?
Yep, rapid transformation.
Yeah, I would say so. One of those areas that I want to talk about is K through 12 education and the passage of the Hope Scholarship in 2021. Americans for Prosperity really led on that effort. Tell us about that.
Well, so that was the culmination of, I want to say, 6 or 7 years worth of work. AFP sort of beginning to socialize this idea of, education should operate as a rising tide that lifts all ships. And how do you make that happen? Well, you give parents and students the ability to make sure that their child's unique needs are met. It's a novel concept, but there's a lot of change resistance when it comes to the education system in America. Coming out of the 1800s, folks basically looked at education as a process through which to get factory workers, and we largely have not really upped the game or invented new education pathways to get to what we need in terms of a 21st century workforce. But also sort of mitigating the dreams and aspirations of a lot of students who feel like that the current education system was not meeting their unique needs. And one of the most important parts of that is that in no way are we saying that public education doesn't work for some kids. Of course it does. I'm sure the vast majority of folks have a great time in their public education system. We're not talking about dissolving that by any stretch of the imagination, I think. Instead, what we want to do is create an alternative pathway for folks who, like in the Hope Scholarship, need some help to be able to have the educational experience that meets their aptitudes and desires.
So what you're saying is you don't know what's best for every kid out there, and neither does the system, right? And so we want to create a system where parents and kids can choose what's best for them and for their education, right?
Absolutely. And I think, the idea of, especially with our organization, Americans for Prosperity, of bottom-up solutions, people that are closest to the problem, knowing how to fix that problem and empowering them to do that. Right. That is the heart and soul of the Hope Scholarship program.
Yeah. What a great way to put it, right? Those bottom-up solutions. And that's really what happened here. You had certainly I think some activists and others who got very involved in this issue and sort of a grassroots army that got involved and helped really change the political landscape that made this possible. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the traditional political dichotomy in West Virginia was that of, you got to remember for 100 years, and this is not a partisan take, it's just the fact of the reality.
Right.
For 100 years, Democrats ruled the state in West Virginia, and it bred this sort of Appalachian fatalism where folks felt like their lot in life is sealed. There's not anything they can do to change it, and so why worry about what the politicians are saying? And so we have been at work for a great many years, both in the education space but outside of that in our other work, to break down that mental model so folks understand, no. The government works for you. You employ them. You are their boss as people. Right. It's for the people, by the people, representative republic. And that's what we are, and we're trying to break that barrier down. And one of the great examples of that in at least the last couple of years has been the Hope Scholarship Act, right? It's something that we began to socialize the idea about. There were obviously West Virginia is the butt of a lot of really ugly and crass jokes, but at the end of the day, part of the reason for that is for a long time we were at the bottom of every socioeconomic statistic that you could envision. But that makes us a perfect sample size for how much freedom can you throw at this and fix it how quickly.
Yeah.
And we're trying to prove that out to fruition. And folks move to the state of health that. But on the education front, we socialized this idea that, hey, maybe we just put parents in charge. Right? Maybe we put them in a position of empowerment to make sure their kids are getting their unique needs met. How do we best do that? So education savings accounts, which is what the Hope Scholarship is the vehicle that we thought was the best, most optimal pathway to do so, because what it does, broad strokes, you enroll your child in the Hope Scholarship program. You receive 100% of the statewide net state aid average, which is about $5,000 annual, to pick the education pathway you want your child to be in. Be that a combination of public, private, charter, individual tutoring, vocational courses, homeschool, individualized learning pathways as it's defined in the bill. And there are myriad ways, but it's not prescriptive. It is up to folks to help their child find that pathway that works best for them. And I think it's going to be a ripple effect, frankly, that will go across the country in the years to come. I know there were maybe 5 or 6 states that were looking at this kind of legislation.
Well, and you see with COVID, I think really accelerated the desire of people to get involved in their kids' education. They started seeing what was being taught in the school districts or what wasn't being taught in some cases, and they just felt that they needed to step in and make sure that their kids' education was taken care of, because that limits the potential of their child. I mean, almost more than anything. And so they've gotten involved, and you're starting to see this, as you said, around the United States. West Virginia kind of led the way in that regard.
And God love the folks in the public school community, because remote learning was never meant to happen at that scale.
Right.
And they tried their best, and it was just a bad circumstance. But I think what happened was a lot of parents' eyes were open to how rigid the education system was. And a lot of them did not like that. And so you begin to see this sort of organic movement begin to grow in the state. Folks didn't really know what the outlet for that necessarily should be, and we had hoped to provide that answer to them. Here is the policy that will solve for a lot of folks the disparate sort of, here's the rigid education system my child's in. I feel like a different pathway maybe would work better. How do I get there? Because I don't know if you know this, but West Virginia is not, in terms of socioeconomic status, our median household income is fairly low in comparison to a lot of other states. And so many folks lack the means by which to find another pathway. And so a lot of the opponents' talking points revolved around, well, you already have school choice if you can afford it, which I think is just a totally unfair and myopic sort of take on kids. But in any event, we had some fights in the political realm, like you mentioned, to get to this point, right? Like I said, the traditional political dichotomy was such that a lot of lawmakers who were not particularly principled would hedge based on what organized labor had to say, because they didn't want money spent against them in their election. 2019, we tried to pass the first ESA bill in the state. And while that was a valiant effort and we did get some reforms done, it laid some groundwork, but it also put a target on the back of our champions who had stood up, lawmakers like State Senator Patricia Rucker, various other folks in the House and Senate, and it put a target on their back for opponents of educational freedom. And what we did was really bring together our activists and all of our capabilities that we have as an organization, being grassroots driven, and make sure that those champions got to return to Charleston to do that good work. And when they did, we passed the nation's first total universal education savings account.
So when you talk about opponents of educational freedom, who were the opponents that you had to overcome in this process?
In particular, unfortunately, organized labor, but also just the status quo. Folks, you've heard this before. Well, we've always done it that way. How could we possibly do it different?
Right.
But there you have that change resistant part of it, but you also have parents on the other side. And I can think of a great example, Ashley Switzer, I believe. I think I'm remembering her name right.
Okay.
In any event, we had tons of different activists, various folks, be it I've got a child who has special needs. They're not being met. I feel trapped. I want to find a different pathway. Be it the person who says, maybe my kid doesn't want to go to college. He seems like he wants to be in the trades. Maybe we put him on a pathway or she on a pathway to be a welder by the time they turn 18 and ready to hit the workforce and provide that sort of mutual benefits to society that we hope to instill in kids. And so what the Hope Scholarship unlocks for those folks is a pathway to get there.
Right. So you, as Americans for Prosperity, as the state director there, because there's probably, our listeners are listening to this and they're thinking, gosh, he's the state director. I mean, I see what he can do to get involved and to change this, but what can I do? I mean, you couldn't do this by yourself as just the state director. You had to have an army of people who would come out and fight for this right, and fight to pass this legislation, and even before that, to fight to get policy champions elected there. So talk about that. What can a parent who's stuck in this situation, or their kid is stuck in this situation, what can they do?
Jeff, I'll run through. Here's my spiel on this. All right, you get let's say even a congressional office. All right, 5 people in that district call that congressional office about an issue. They immediately begin casework on it. All right.
Right.
Now extrapolate that down to the state legislative level. All right. You get 2 or 3 people that call an office, and in West Virginia, our lawmakers don't have a lot of staff. They answer their own phone. And so you're talking to the member. You're like, hey, Jim,
right.
Guy that lives down the street from me, I've got a problem. It moves the needle in a great way. And I can't tell you how many folks I've talked to that just don't know or don't feel like they have a platform that they can be a part of to engage their lawmakers in that way. And so what we do as an organization that I think is the true secret sauce of Americans for Prosperity is be that platform for people, whether it comes from holding lawmakers accountable, or even better yet, the best part about holding lawmakers accountable is celebrating the victories with them when we do get good policy passed. And so I think that is how you drive transformation.
Yeah. Well, you talk about holding lawmakers accountable. So you said, was it 2019 when you first tried to pass this law, right? So it didn't pass.
Right.
So what did you do to hold folks accountable?
Well, I mean, it was a full court press, right? We do a scorecard every year that lets folks know how their lawmakers stood on issues, because I always had a sneaking suspicion in my tenure as working in politics. Yeah. Despite Dad, no, just kidding. But in any event, so I always thought it was the case that maybe lawmakers thought nobody's going to know how I voted when I go back home. Mm-hmm. And it actually, not that long ago, I'd say within the last 20 years, roll call votes were not even recorded in West Virginia.
Really?
Seriously.
Wow.
It was the work of Delegate John Overington, one of the true stalwarts of transparency and principle in that regard. Yeah. Actually got that done when Republicans were in the minority.
Okay.
But in the spirit of that, what we do is we basically say, okay, we're going to make sure folks know how their lawmakers voted. We have all kinds of events across the state to walk folks through what we think the biggest priorities were that session, where their lawmaker was at, and it's that level of transparency. If a lawmaker's hot under the collar because folks know in their district how they voted on an issue and they're concerned about it, probably the case that they voted the wrong way.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But that's not our problem. That's their problem.
That's their problem.
It's the job of citizens to step up and make sure that lawmakers are held to account.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you found policy champions that ran against them, right?
Yep. We actually had the architect of the Education Savings Account, the Hope Scholarship.
Yeah.
State Senator Patricia Rucker was in the most competitive state Senate race in the state,
and yet she had the courage to take this on. Right. It would have been easier just to hide in the weeds on it.
Never backed down. Never blinked.
Wow.
And she's a stalwart education freedom champion. She was a public school teacher. She's very much of the mindset. This is not something that should be looked at as an attack on education, but rather supplementary to all the data and statistics that we have about educational pathways and availing folks to find the right pathway for their child, be that public school test scores, parental satisfaction, you name it, it generally makes everything better. It's a rising tide that lifts all ships. Right. And she got that, and she never backed down from that vision of passing something that was bold and transformational. And, she doesn't win that race. Guess what? That bill never passes, and, the 3,000 or 4,000 kids that are now enrolled in the program are without that option, and maybe perhaps stuck in a situation where they're not going to reach their greatest potential level. It's when you go out and make sure that a policy champion is able to return to the Capitol to do that good work, what you're doing is bringing to fruition the vision that person has, not based on the person but the principles. Mm-hmm. And that's the crucial part.
So then in 2021, you felt like you had the pieces in place, the policy champions in place. I'm sure it wasn't just that simple that, we have the votes. I'm sure there was a lot of work that went into this, the passage of this legislation, right?
Absolutely. Folks under the dome every day talking to their lawmakers, making sure that, lawmakers are emboldened because these things are not easy. The best pieces of policy that we will accomplish as an organization, as people, happen the hard way. And lawmakers have to be emboldened. They're just like anybody else. You want to hear a pat on the back. Hey, you're doing a good job. And so when you facilitate that kind of interaction between the public and your grassroots leaders and lawmakers, you get this sort of trifecta effect where everybody gets this warm, fuzzy feeling that, hey, this is a big deal. We are doing the right thing, despite the opposition, which there was very heavy opposition. I think that there were a couple of different political engagements that happened in the years before we passed the Hope Scholarship. I think one of the candidates that we endorsed won by 25 votes. So you tell me as a person your vote doesn't matter.
Yeah, right.
I'll tell you about that race and a couple other ones. But in any event, all of those pieces coming together to really put policymakers in a place to do the right thing. Because a lot of them, their heart's in the right place. We have a citizen legislature in West Virginia. Mm-hmm. So these folks are, I know one guy drives a school bus, another guy, works at a bank, another guy is, selling insurance. This is not their day job. They're not career politicians. Right. They are people that want to do the right thing, and they need to hear from constituents in their district. They need to hear those signals about what good policy is, what people want to see, and that's where we as an organization and as activists and people can really drive that transformation. Yeah,
and that probably helped you in the passage of this, that you had a citizen legislature, right, who sees this. I mean, lots of other states have legislatures or full-time legislatures. The legislators themselves make a very good living at it. Those are the kind of people that aren't really affected by educational freedom, right? Because they have the freedom. They can buy the freedom. And so often the people that control the levers of power, they don't see it. They're in their bubble. They don't see that there are people who don't have that kind of educational freedom. But it seems like in West Virginia, you had that in the legislature, that you have everyday people, average people, right, who are called to serve in the legislature, and they seem to have seen that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's and it's kind of when you have one of those moments where something truly transformational was accomplished at the legislative level. It's like a light bulb moment that lawmakers have after that, where they go, "Oh man, that was a big deal." It's like, yeah, we told you that, but until they get out and talk to some of their peers, start getting invited to a conference to say, "Hey, how'd you guys pull that off?" Right. Because this is a big deal and we want to do the same thing. They have that light bulb moment where they go, "Oh, we can be leaders on a national scale."
Right.
And I think that is a powerful incentive for folks who, again, in the spirit of public service, they just want to do the best thing that they can for their state and make, in our example, the state a better place to live, work, and raise a family. But they could be inspirations to other states. And that's how you create, I think, a movement for a policy like you're seeing with educational freedom right now.
Yeah. Now, the fight's not over. The fight didn't end in 2021. As soon as this became law, it got challenged, and you've still been fighting this battle. Just had a victory in court, sounds like. Tell us about that.
So yeah, I mean, anytime you work on an education bill, you assume that a lawsuit's going to happen.
Sure,
it happens almost every time.
Right.
Like clockwork, these lawsuits are meant to disenfranchise the kids that bill is meant to help. And that's exactly what happened. Actually, the folks that filed the lawsuit against the Hope Scholarship waited until the enrollment period was over as a strategic way to keep kids from having educational freedom. It's dastardly.
That's very dastardly.
Out-of-state trial lawyers came in and basically said, "No, we don't think your kids should have this." And so we spent a considerable amount of time and effort working through the process of combating that legal challenge. And eventually at the Supreme Court level won 4-1 decision. And so pretty decidedly the framework of the Hope Scholarship is upheld, as we knew it would be. But, sometimes you got to go through the legal process.
Yeah, and of course, overturning what the representatives of the people decided, right? If that court case would have gone the other way, it would have overturned the will of the voters and the will of the legislature.
Yep.
In that regard. Well, and so that's great. So now you're finally moving forward with the Hope Scholarship, right?
Yeah, it's. I believe that the initial payments to accounts for the kids who have enrolled will hit next week. And one of the things I'm most excited about is so the Hope Scholarship isn't available to all kids immediately. It's available to basically like 90% of all kids, because you have to be in public school in order to have the funds generated, because it's based on the school funding formula. What is baked into the Hope Scholarship is a trigger that in 2024, if under 5% of that eligible population is not enrolled, so we're under 5% enrollment of eligible folks, it automatically expands to kids that are currently outside of public school, so homeschool, private school, et cetera. And so we are on track to innately just have 100% open, universal enrollment into the Hope Scholarship, and that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and that's what we want, right? Is a system where, it's just unfettered choice, right? Well, that's amazing. What kind of kids are going to be helped under this? I mean, that's the thing, right? There's kids that can get out of this if their parents have enough money to send them to a private school right now. That's the system in most states that we live in, is if the parents have the wealth, they can go take their kids. But that's not who we're talking about helping. And the opposition to this doesn't point out that the kids that are going to be helped by this are the most disadvantaged.
Well, and that's true, but I also would challenge both our activists and lawmakers to consider it this way. We should not be prescriptive with regards to whom we are helping. If an education pathway is opened up that is viable for everyone, let me tell you, it's going to poll a whole lot better. I always joke with the lawmakers, like, you guys are already not popular, okay? Like, people just don't like it because you're a politician.
Right.
Don't make something so restrictive and narrowed that you're going to preclude some people who would benefit from this because of some, arbitrary dollar amount.
Right.
Somebody tried to put a means test in the bill. And we killed all the amendments because there was just so much momentum from the grassroots behind that legislation. But I guess the parable I'm trying to get at is, the more restrictive a program is, parents are going to assume, hey, that's not for my kid. I'm not going to get that. And so the more wide open you can make enrollment, with the ideal being universal, the better off you are, because you're building a constituency around that, frankly.
Right. All right. Well, listen, we're almost out of time, but I want to hear, just tell me quickly, what are some of the other great things you're getting ready to do in West Virginia? Now that you're moving with this Hope Scholarship, I'm sure that you're not done in education and you're not done in helping revolutionize West Virginia. So tell me some of the things you're working on.
Well, so, growing an economy doesn't happen in a vacuum. And
right.
I think that we have had, through our Pathway to Prosperity agenda that began in 2016, we have enacted myriad policies that are really transformational for West Virginia, breaking down barriers to folks being able to thrive there. And I think, the next logical course for that, we've got to cut taxes in the state. We have a $1.3 billion surplus. That money does not belong to government. That is the people's money, and we're over-collecting, and we need to give some of it back so they can invest in their lives and livelihoods.
Man, sounds like a lot of work, and I'm glad that you're the man that we've got doing all that great work and leading the troops in West Virginia. These Hope Scholarships in West Virginia, they're giving educational opportunity to the parents and the children of the state. And if you live in West Virginia, you have Jason Huffman and Americans for Prosperity to thank for the great work there, and all the activists who got involved as well. And if you don't live in West Virginia and you want to do this very same thing in your state, there's hope there too, because you can contact Americans for Prosperity. You can also send me an email. You can send me an email at jeff@americanpotential.com. We'll make sure that you get hooked up with the Americans for Prosperity chapter in your region or your state, and we'll get you all hooked up. Jason, thanks for joining us. You're doing great work in West Virginia, and I hope that someday I'll come and have one of those pepperoni rolls.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and we'll definitely make that happen. Open invite.
Keep it warm for me. Tell your mother I'm coming. Okay? All right. Sounds great. We'll be back with another edition of American Potential.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.